everyone. Welcome to the Self-Awareness Journey podcast. I'm Melissa Albers.
And I'm JJ Parker. This podcast is for seekers, seekers of happiness and joy, seekers of a centered approach to success in life, seekers of their true, authentic selves.
Get ready for some real talk on everything from anxiety, emotions, and habits to love, compassion, and forgiveness. We know you'll be challenged and enlightened by this conversation. We're so glad you're here. Let's dive in.
So one of my buddies just was preparing for his private pilot test the other week.
Ooh, that sounds kind of scary, actually.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean,
it does.
I got my private pilot's license and he's working on his, and it's very interesting because to get your license, you have to you do all this training, then you have a written test.
Yes.
And then you have an oral test, like with the examiner, and then you have a flight test. So you go actually fly with the examiner. So there's three separate tests that you have to pass in order to get your license. And
see, now I'm even more intimidated. That sounds terribly difficult, actually. As it should be,
right?
I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a serious activity. It should be, they shouldn't let anyone just hop in a plane and see what happens. But the thing that I think is so interesting about it is that for most of us in most of our careers, like as adults, we don't really have tests, like proper scheduled, pass or fail, like kind of tests.
You're right. Yeah. That's
like I went through it and just helping him through it, it became so obvious to me. It's just like, oh wow, look at all of the anxiety and all of his worry and overthinking and the amount of self-doubt and things that crept into his life. I mean, this is a very seasoned and Pete's a salesperson, right? So he is very comfortable, being out
with
there.
risk and just getting out there.
And here's this guy that is just absolutely, crumbling under this anxiety that these series of tests are happening.
Well, don't you remember when you took yours?
Thing.
You were the same way.
Same exact way. And so it really got me thinking, it's very interesting that, what is that reaction? Is that like a reaction from our childhood, or is it just because we're not used to doing that as an adult, being tested like that?
Oh, I think tests in general cause, for some people, including me, huge anxiety. I am a terrible test taker. Tests scare me to death. I don't know why. I mean, I can know the content inside and out, and there's just something about this idea of pass or fail that makes me just freeze up. I've always been like that.
So I wonder what is it? Like it's fear, right? Like it's fear that you're not good enough. Like there's so many emotions that go in with this idea of a test.
I know.
So for me, it is definitely I worked on a thing for a really long time, and if I can't pass this test, it would feel like a failure or a waste of time. There's a lot of ego wrapped up in that, right? Like I would feel like I'm not good enough, or I'm not smart enough, or I'm not competent enough, and that would feel horrible.
Right. Well, I don't even think if it's something that you worked on for a long time. You said if it's something you worked on for a long time. Like, I remember the two words that scared me the most when I was in high school was pop quiz. We're going to have a pop quiz, and my heart would sink every single time that I had to take a test. Now, some people are very good test takers, and I'm interested to know what it is about those people that they enjoy tests and they're really good at, or maybe they don't enjoy them, but they're just good at them. Maybe those are two completely different things. Your skills associated around how you have to think about a test versus your emotions around how you have to take a test. And I think, when we're young, all through high school or college or any other, obviously there's also some career choices in which you have to take regular tests. Not many, but there are. you kind of get into the habit of what those tests are or how the feelings are with those. But I've never been so glad in my life to not have to be in school taking tests.
There's no like professional coach test you need to take every year to.
Well, actually there are some in some coaching processes, but no, none that I participate in. And maybe that's on purpose, and I just didn't even know it. But I think, what I was also reflecting on is, maybe you get better and better at something when you have practice with it. Like Dan Harris with his 10% Happier book and his 10% Happier meditation app, and we talk about him sometimes on our pod. He talks about one of the ways of getting over something that you're afraid of is to do it a lot. So like his big fear was getting in elevators. He was terrified of getting in elevators. So he just made himself repetitively get in elevators. So I kind of think like when you're younger and you have to take a lot of tests, it's just, I wish we could figure out a way to emotionally know that if that repetition is one way that you can start to feel better about something, but then by the time you're an adult, you step out of that and there's not lots of opportunities to practice those feelings.
Yeah, you're out of the habit.
You're out of the habit. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
I don't.
When I was going through that process, and then it just became so clear. Like, when you're in something and you're doing in the middle of it, you'd have all these emotions that are flying all over the place, and you're just kind of doing the best you can. But as I was watching Pete, go through this whole process, it became so much clearer. My own emotions, they all came back like, oh yeah, that is how I felt. So when you can watch it in someone else, it's really helpful to get context.
Did you start feeling like that again?
Oh yeah, for sure.
When you were,
I definitely was mirroring his anxiety for a little while.
Oh, so I have a question for you. Do you think that there's any other times in your life today that you take on the attitude that something that you're going through is a test? It may not be a formal test, but there's a lot of things in my life that I feel like come up for me that feel like a test. And even if they're like sneakily clad as just an everyday occasion, right? Yeah. Or they're not labeled as such, I still feel the exact same stress. And this striving, that's the emotion.
Yep. That's where I was going to go when you're saying that is definitely, there's definitely, I think as adults, we'll label them more as goals than tests.
Yes.
But
right.
It has the same kind of effect. Like we want to get to this goal, and then we put all sorts of pressure on, did we make the goal or not? Yeah. And that pressure leading up to the goal in a lot of ways like actually harms it. So
I totally agree. Do you have a real life?
Well, in that testing scenario, the thing that I was most reflecting on is the hardest thing about it for me during that time was actually like trying to stay centered and really recognizing when I was having like a big, a big bout of like anxiety or a big rising of like, I'm not good enough, or I'm not smart enough, or any of those negative self-doubt thoughts. And they would just creep right in there and take over my mind for a while until I recognized it and said, wait, no, I've been working on this for years. Like I got it. Right. But getting myself like recognizing it and then getting myself back to centered, would happen over and over. And then that's what I was saying when I was watching Pete go through it. He'd do the same exact thing. Like he'd get all spooled up and then we'd go get lunch and then we'd get back to centered and then back and forth and back and forth. It's like a little teeter-totter you're on for like a few months as you're preparing. But you're right. We do that in life too.
Yes. Yeah. Because I was just, as you were talking, I was like, those are the tests that are coming, and they're advertised tests. It's like, this is the thing that you're going to do in your life. It's coming, you can participate or not, but if you're going to participate, there is a test. So that's that. But then there's the self-induced ones. You know, there's the self-induced ones that we set up for ourselves, like some kind of, I don't know if we're trying to prove to ourselves or, you know, we put ourselves under these, like, for example, for me, within the last week, I was writing content for doing some leadership events. Now, this is content that I've written for 15 years. I know it inside and out. And I'm really excited to deliver it. I'm not dreading delivering it. I'm looking forward to it. But JJ, I created this whole mind map with several little tests within that map. Like, I can't just sit down and plan this out. Now I have to make this really hard for myself. And I did that I did it so harshly. I don't know if I was trying to make it better than it's ever been, or, you know, oh my gosh, what if this isn't relevant for people? What if this is boring? Like, I put all these weird things packed around it. And it felt very much like I was making a test for myself. That's what it felt like. And so I felt like this unnecessary emotion of striving to do it perfectly. And that was completely self-induced.
Yeah. You said do it perfectly. That's the other thing that when we think about tests or testing ourselves, the expectation of what's the mark? Is perfect reasonable?
Right. Well, is perfect even a thing?
Yeah.
You know?
Gonna get 100% on this test? Probably not.
Yeah. But, you know, you think about, why is that coming through? Why are those emotions coming through? And it's interesting to think about, you know, like, historically, I've done content creation for events for many, many times, right? Historically, that's a thing, and it will be a thing always in my career as long as I have this career. And it's just interesting to me how I've gone through these periods before, and that's almost like why it's a test, because as this period comes up, like, writing content and getting into the detail and the weeds of things is my very least favorite thing of my role. It's my very least favorite thing, but it's a huge necessary thing for me to be good in my role. It's something I have to do. But it's really funny because as those periods of time start coming up on the calendar and I can see them, I immediately start to feel that dread immediately. And I start feeling like, okay, this is going to be a test. You're not going to get frustrated. You're not going to shut down. You're not going to take way longer than you need to do something. So it all becomes this self-reflective testing of self to be better than I was the last time. You know, I think we do that. And I don't think we're even really necessarily consciously aware of the fact that we set ourselves up. And it is a bit of a test.
Yeah, that's interesting behavior. Like, you're trying to, the test is against yourself. You're trying to be better than you were before, which I think is probably a pretty good virtue. Like, you're constantly improving. You always want to be better. But maybe it's unrealistic. Again, like, maybe there's no reason to try to do that. And I'm not saying, like, you want to do bad work. I'm just saying it, you know.
No. I'm not taking it that way. I think you're right. I mean, I think it is really interesting to reflect on this, because I think if all of us sat for a few moments and thought, what are we working on in our lives right now that feels like a test? Okay, like, here's another. What about all life's experience that happened to you that you didn't have any choice in? Right? And what if it's happened to you before? And so now it's the second or third time it's happened to you, and you all of a sudden say, you know, I should be able to be better at this. I should have, this time it will be different for me. Maybe not even better, but like corporate downsizing, for example.
Sure, like you've gotten laid off from a job not once or twice, but a couple times, maybe just your industry's cyclical or lots of different reasons.
Right, and it hits your emotional wall like the Hoover Dam breaking down, right? It's very scary. It's very overwhelming. The emotions within.
Yeah.
And how many of us sort of push ourselves to, like, you know what, I've done this before. The outcome's going to be different this time. Like, I think that's like setting ourselves up for a test.
Yeah, I'd say probably one of the better examples of a test as an adult is actually a job interview. Like, right, when you go in for a job interview, you get all of that emotion beforehand because there's a lot of anxiety. It feels like you're being
Jitters.
judged, like you want to do it perfect. There's a lot at stake. But again, if you think about those kinds of emotions leading into that kind of event,
Yes.
those are not things you want to carry into a job interview, right? You want to bring in a sense of like calm and competency and confidence.
You know what I was just thinking about? Like another adult test is, well, and I don't even know if they still do this, but years ago when I was getting married, we had to go through like marriage coaching before we got married. Okay. And we had to get in front of the priest who was going to marry us. And we had to fill out like this inventory, personal inventory, separate from each other. And then he sat with us.
Oh, funny.
And went, and he was a great, he was a great big man. And he had the ability to say, nope, you can't get married. I mean, now, granted, we could have gone anywhere and done that. But at the time, JJ, it was so scary.
That's funny.
Right? He was this great, big, huge guy. And I wasn't even Catholic. So we were getting married in the Catholic church because Mitch's family was Catholic. And I didn't care what church we got married in. Anyway, so he said, well, you both answered everything correctly except for one question. And my heart just started to sink. And he said, one of you said that you were living together and the other one said you weren't. Which one of you is lying?
No.
And I raised my hand. It was me. It was an instant fail. I failed the test. So that was an adult test, sort of.
Look at you now, still married.
Oh my gosh.
So I wonder where like all this emotion around these kinds of events and this testing, like it probably comes from childhood. The thing is, as kids, when you're going through school, it's like all about testing. Right? It's like the way they can measure if everyone's kind of moving through the system and understanding things. Yeah. Just last night, I was actually asking Ethan about how high school was going. Well, because he's a senior. This is Ethan's last semester of K-12 school. Yep. So he's like, he's totally like on the senior slide, right? He's got like senioritis. He's got like 2.5 classes. He barely shows, you know what I mean? Like, you know, the last semester. Totally. And so we were kind of chatting about it, and he goes, "Yeah, you know what? Like, it was easier than I thought." I'm like, "What was easier than you thought?" "School." I'm like, the whole thing. Really? Really? Yeah. Wow. Well, and especially his senior year. He's like, yeah, 11th and 12th grade was really easy. He did not have a big workload during those times. But I think we talk about this a lot, where our childhood experiences really shape our thinking all through adulthood. Yep. And this idea of testing and the anxiety, because I'm going to guess that most of the population has a more negative emotion around testing than positive. I mean, I'm sure there's a few that are like, yes, a test, I love it. But I don't think it's the majority. But that carries through. My daughter is that person. Yeah, for sure. She's well prepared. Oh, dear. But yeah, I totally agree with you. Most of us don't. Yeah. So that, I mean, if we just stop and think about the idea that we're carrying that kind of experience around tests into adulthood, and just watch how we act around things that we, like you said, perceive as tests. Just an awareness of that is immensely helpful. Oh my gosh, I agree. Because even as a parent of adult children, there are many times where I will feel like I'll say something or do something, and then I'll be like, oh, that wasn't what they were expecting. Well, I guess I failed that one. Like, you know, like making a joke in my mind, but that's the phrase, right? Oh,
I failed that one. This is like a landmine. This is a test. Like I say things like that as a joke all the time. But there it is. There it is. I wonder, too, like it would be interesting to kind of realize what those situations are, like you're saying, but it would also be interesting then to recognize what those feelings are, what those feelings feel like. And if you recognize those feelings in your system when you don't recognize that you're seeing something as a test, like if they can guide you into realizing, oh, I'm framing this in a way that's maybe not helpful.
Yeah, that's actually a really good call out. I bet there's tons of things that, like little micro things that happen day to day that we get the same feeling and we frame in a test kind of way, but they're not really tests.
Right. No, that's all that self-induced testing.
The other thing we should think about too is really what's the consequence of, a pass fail or an A, B, C, D grade on any particular test.
Or perfect execution.
Because a lot of times
like an Olympian.
It's like we don't need to do a lot of these things perfect, but we put all of this expectation on it, or we maybe don't even need to do them at all. That's the other thing about quote tests as adults is that a lot of times we can just choose to actually not do them. So why whip up so much anxiety when we can choose to not?
I'm going to make myself clean out my linen closet. That's it. For sure I'm going to make myself do it in an hour. I'm going to test myself how fast I can do it. Oh, well.
So just to round out that pilot testing story.
Yeah.
Pete passed, which was awesome.
Oh, so, yay. All three of them?
All three of them. Yep. And so obviously when you go through a big event like that, it took me like a year and a half or something like that. So it's a big endeavor. Really fun when you get on the other side of it. Really, really fun. But
I have a question about that.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
The other thing about this particular test is the flying part.
Yeah.
If you don't do one of the procedures right, like if you don't make your turn quite right or you don't do one of the landings quite right, you don't fail the whole thing. All you have to do is come back and prove that you can do the one thing that you didn't do right. So it actually lowers the stakes quite a bit because it's not like you have to start at 0 on the test again. You just have to come back and do the one thing you didn't do quite right.
That is so nice.
It's super nice.
Because even
but again,
that's awesome.
This is like a context problem. Is like when you're in it, it feels like it's all or nothing. But in reality, it's like you only have to redo the one little thing. And I think there's a lot of scenarios where we do have big events in our lives, like a job change, or even, things like, having a kid or moving or these big life events.
Or getting married or getting divorced.
Big life events. And it feels like it's all or nothing. But in reality, it's probably not all or nothing. There's probably if you do 90% of it and you mess up like a small percent of it, a small part of it, you can just go redo that one part.
Yeah. That's really good context.
Did you enjoy this episode? Please go to your favorite podcast platform to subscribe, rate, and leave a review so others can discover it as well.
Growing self-awareness is a lifelong journey, and there's always further to go. And it's better when we're all in it together. Please think of someone you know who could benefit from hearing today's conversation and share this episode with them. We can't thank you enough for listening. Until next time, happy exploring, seekers.